Good morning, everyone. This is Professor Muhammad Farghal. Today I'm going to talk about conversational implicatures, or what's familiarly known as implicature theory. This theory was put forward by Paul Grice back in 1975. He wrote a very influential article titled Logic in Human Conversation. The article received lots of attention. There has been a lot of material that deals with the insights put or expounded in that article. Paul Grice himself was a language philosopher, and he wanted to base human communication on reasoning. He wanted to capture what's going on in indirectness in human communication, and he came to the conclusion that human communication or indirectness in human communication is in fact based on our ability to reason, on reasoning, our ability to read between the lines. And that's what he calls conversational implicatures. So conversational implicatures are the messages read between the lines. His theory cited the cooperative principle as an umbrella kind of principle, which simply states that people cooperate with each other when they engage in communication. So human communication is based on cooperation. The speaker and the hearer cooperate. So they are not there to make life difficult for each other, but rather to engage in communication that can be followed easily. This cooperative principle subsumes four main maxims. They are called maxims of conversation or conversational maxims. The maxim of quality, the maxim of quantity, the maxim of manner, and the maxim of relation or relevance. Grice wants to show us that when we engage in communication, we cooperate with each other, and by cooperating with each other, mainly we either observe these maxims of conversation when we usually convey our messages directly, or we flout one or more of these maxims of conversation in order to deliver a message indirectly rather than directly by way of conversational implicature. But when flouting a maxim of conversation, cooperation is there. This means that the speaker, for one reason or another, decides to deliver a message indirectly rather than directly by flouting, let's say, the quality maxim. When doing that, he works with the assumption that the interlocutor can cope with this flouting, can get to the indirect message. So the assumption is that cooperation is there. So flouting a maxim of conversation is done for a communicative purpose, or what we may say in Arabic, لشيء في نفسي يعقوب. There is something suppressed, and this something is communicated by way of conversational implicature. How do we observe and how do we flout maxims of conversation? When it comes to the quality maxim, we observe the maxim of conversation when we commit ourselves to the truth of what we're saying. When we produce an utterance, we commit ourselves to the truth of what's said in that utterance, at least the linguistic truth. For example, when I say John is a genius and I mean it, then I'm committing myself to the truth of the proposition I am expressing. And in fact, there isn't much to write home about here. Why? Because I'm speaking the truth, both linguistically and underlyingly. But in some cases, I may say John is a genius when everyone around knows that John is an idiot. Let's say, look, John the genius is coming round. When all the people there know that John is an idiot, so they start laughing. What's happening here? I'm flouting the maxim of quality. Why? Because I'm not speaking the truth. But am I lying? Notice that here, not speaking the truth cannot be equated with lying. I'm not speaking the linguistic truth, but I'm committed to the underlying truth. What's the underlying truth here? That John is an idiot, and the people around, the people there can get the message. They figure out the message and they start laughing. Probably everyone laughs except for poor John, who does not get the message here. Or he may and start fighting with them. You never know. But irony, so irony here is a paradigm example of flouting the maxim of quality. Simply because you say something, but you mean the opposite of what you're saying. Someone spills coffee on your new trousers at the coffee shop, and you turn to him and say, "Oh, you're making my day." You mean it. You don't. You are just conveying the message that what has happened is a terrible act. But you are not saying this directly. Rather, you are conveying the message indirectly. So the interlocutor would not respond by saying, "You're welcome." Rather, he's supposed to apologize. Say, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. I don't know how to explain this." Things like that, but not responding by saying thank you or you're most welcome, or things like that, because this would betray the message being communicated. Ironies. Okay. What else? Metaphors, creating metaphors. We often use language creatively by coming up with our own creative metaphors. If, for example, we refer to love as a fever. If you are discussing love with someone, and look, love is a fever. All right. There must be some message behind what you have said. You mean that love is changeable? Do you mean that love is so powerful? All right, there must be some message, and you assume that based on what's going on, based on cooperation and what's going on, the interlocutor can get the message. So all creative metaphors, when we create metaphors, we flout the maxim of quality. Why? We are not speaking the truth. When you say Jane's face is an apple pie, for example, or a full moon, okay, there must be some message behind what you're saying. Or John is a chimney or a moving chimney. What do you mean by that? Okay, there must be some message. Okay, so it all depends on the assumption that the interlocutor can figure out an area of cognitive correspondence between what you're saying and what's going on. And that's what a creative metaphor is at the end of the day. Okay, You are drawing a comparison based on the out of the ordinary, right? Rather than the ordinary. The ordinary, if you are talking about something that is familiar, for example, and if you are using idiomatic expressions, which are part of the language, you are not flouting the maxim of quality. Why is that? Because idiomatic expressions, despite the fact that they are figurative or metaphorical in nature, they are part of the language. They have conventional meanings. But when, instead of saying that John is a heavy smoker, you say John is a moving chimney. All right. John is a moving chimney. Here is a creative metaphor. You are using language creatively here, and you are flouting the maxim of quality. So the conversational implicature here is that John is a heavy smoker. If you say that John is a heavy smoker, then you are observing the maxim of quality. But if instead you come up with a metaphor to describe that he's a heavy smoker, then in that case you are flouting the maxim of quality. Hyperboles, exaggerations, an exaggerated statement. When you tell someone that I called you 100 times, but you did not respond. Did you call him 100 times? Or did you count the calls? You did not. So here, again, here's a matter of flouting the maximum of quality. All right, to indicate that you called him many times. Rhetorical questions, as used by politicians mainly, which do not require answers. Why? Because the answers have already been given. They contrast with generic questions. Generic questions observe the maximum of quality. When you ask a generic question, for example, you don't know something, you ask about it. Then you are observing the maximum of quality. You are speaking the truth. Why? Because there is an information gap. For example, did Jane go shopping last night? You don't know that, whether she went shopping or not. So this is a generic question. And it observes the maximum of quality. But at the end of a lecture, for example, if a speaker says, can we keep quiet after all what I have said? And the answer is obviously no. So this is a rhetorical question, and it does not require an answer. In other words, the speaker here flouts the maxim of quality. So the maxim of quality has to do with speaking the truth. But notice that here we are talking about two types of truth: the linguistic truth and the underlying truth. In both cases, when observing the maximum quality and when flouting the maximum quality, the speaker is committed to the underlying truth. But when flouting the maximum quality, the speaker is not committed to the linguistic truth of what he's saying. So when said ironically that something is nice, when the speaker means that it is terrible or disastrous, this does not speak the linguistic truth, but it does speak the underlying truth. Why? Because the speaker is committed to the underlying truth here rather than the linguistic truth. That what, for example, someone who's done something bad to you and you turn to him and say, that's very nice of you. All right, you don't mean it. You mean the opposite. So you are not committed to the linguistic truth of what you're saying, but you are committed to the underlying truth that this is kind of terrible. The second maxim of conversation, the maxim of quantity, has to do with the amount of information used, the amount of language used. one is supposed to use the right amount of language in his utterances, no more, no less. That's when he's observing the maxim of quantity. If the person or if the speaker is over-informative or under-informative for some communicative purpose, for some reason, then he's said to be flouting the maxim of quantity. Okay. Flouting the maxim of quantity is quite familiar in the passage of communication. For example, you are asked about, all right, how you think of your student's term paper. And you respond by saying, I like your folder. Would that be a good answer to the student? Or would the student appreciate this kind of answer? And smarter student would not, all right? Why? Because the quality of the term paper is not based on how good or how nice the folder is. So here is a matter of what? Being under-informative. So instead of telling the student that his term paper is not good enough, you are telling him that you like the folder. And he's supposed to figure out the message that you don't like his or her term paper. Over-informative. Sometimes we are over-informative. You're asked about something and you give more information than is required. But you do this for a communicative purpose. You want to deliver some indirect message by way of conversational implication. In response to the question, how many A's did you get last term? And the answer is, I got 2 A's. Here, the interlocutor is observing the maxim of quantity. Why? Because this standardly implicates that he got 2 A's, no more, no less. But assuming that instead of saying, I got 2 A's, he responds by saying, I got only 2 A's. Only, the addition of only here would give rise to a conversational implicature that he was supposed to do better last term. He didn't do well last term. And this is done by flouting the maxim of quantity. How? By being over-informative. A familiar example of being over-informative is the use of tautologies. Tautologies means repeating the same item. And probably all tautologies can be reduced to the formula X is X. When you say that X is X, but in fact you mean X is Y. So here you are over-informative, but you are doing this for a communicative purpose. For example, a husband is a husband, telling someone that a husband is a husband, addressing either the husband or the wife. And this would give different conversational implications depending on the situation. Are you talking about the obligations of the husband toward his wife or the obligations of the wife toward her husband or toward her children or what have you? All right. This, so it's not that conversational implicatures are context-based. You have to consult the context in order to get to the conversational implicature, in order to figure out the conversational implicature. So a husband is a husband, instead of saying a husband is responsible for his wife. All right, if say this, all right, a husband is financially responsible for his wife. Okay, or of his wife. This, all right, this simply, okay, observes the maxims of quantity. But if instead you opt for a tautological expression, a husband is a husband, but you implicate the same thing. All right, so you're doing here the same job, but by way of conversational implication. Business is business, said in different situations, can conversationally implicate different things. Business involves hard work, so you're not there to sit idly. Business does not involve connections. So forget the fact that I am your uncle. Business involves no mercy. So you can't blame me for hitting another businessman so hard. All these can be conversational implicatures of the tautological expression business is business. So when it comes to the quantity maxim, it's really a matter of either being under-informative or over-informative, or writing the right, or using the right amount of language when you are observing it. So flouting it has to do with being either under-informative or over-informative. But you opt for that for a communicative purpose in order to convey a conversational implicature, or in order to convey a message by way of conversational implicature, to see it more, to say it more properly. The next maxim of conversation is the maxim of manner, and this relates to the way something is said. That's why it's called the maxim of manner. And in fact, there are many sub-maxims of this maxim. Be perspicuous, or be clear. This is one sub-maxim. Be orderly, another sub-maxim. Be brief, and finally, avoid ambiguity. Don't be ambiguous. Don't use ambiguous utterances. Okay, that is when someone is observing the maxim of manner. For example, when it comes to being orderly. Okay, usually when we communicate with each other, and when we observe the maxim of manner, we follow the natural order of things. You go to the shop and buy sugar, for example. You don't buy sugar and go to the shop. You go to college, then get a degree. You don't get a degree, then go to college. This is the natural order of things. But if you change this natural order for some reason, then there must be some message being communicated, some conversational implicature. And this may happen in the literature, for example. A familiar example has to do with getting married and then having children. So one first gets married, then he has children. It's not the other way around. Or getting married, then be pregnant. But assuming that someone asks you about Jane, I haven't heard of Jane recently. Any news about her? Oh, she got pregnant and married Awad. Okay, poor Awad, all right? So Awad is married to a woman who's already pregnant. Okay, so this conversationally implicates that Jane is bearing an illegal child. This is a conversational implicature. It's not said directly. Adverts often flout the maxim of manner in order to attract attention, in order to get more customers. Why? Because when the customer likes the advert, he probably either buys the commodity or goes into the restaurant or something like that. An interesting example is an advert used by Pizza Hut. It reads, 7 days without pizza makes 1 week. And notice here that this adverb brings to mind two schemata, the time schemata and the food schemata. Week here, the word play on week. Week time, week strength. Okay. This is all right. This is a flouting of the maxim of manner, and this is done in order to attract customers, to attract people. Taboo stuff often involves flouting of the maxim of manner. All right, when you say something that means two things. Usually one is a straightforward interpretation and the other is a taboo kind of message. All such examples involve flouting the maxim of manner. When you spell out words instead of saying them in the ordinary way in front of children, you don't want a child to hear a taboo word, so you spell it out. This escapes the child and you get the message across, don't you? The ice cream example in the literature is a familiar one. So a couple going shopping with their little boy. The husband suggests buying something for the boy and the wife responds by saying, I veto, ICECREAM. That's all right, we buy him an apple. We'll buy him an apple. Okay, so she did not say ice cream because if she said ice cream, probably the little boy would insist on having an ice cream. That's why she spelled it out in order for it to escape the child so they could buy an apple or anything else for him. Again, what's being flouted here is the maxim of manner. So the maxim of manner can be flouted by what? By being not clear or not perspicuous, by being not brief, by being not orderly, by being ambiguous. Any one of these can flout the maxim of manner in order to convey a message by way of conversational implicature. Okay. The last maxim of conversation is the maxim of relation, what Grice called the relation maxim, but is more familiarly known as the relevance maxim, which has to do with being relevant. Right? If you are observing the maxim of relation, you are being relevant. If you flout it, then you must be flouting it for a communicative purpose. It would be crazy for me, for example, to start talking about the price of tomatoes at this juncture. Would you appreciate that? Yeah, this is crazy. Why? Because this is not relevant to what I'm doing. So we make sure that when we engage in communication, we are relevant. We observe the maximum relevant, but we can also flout it. But when we flout it, we base our flouting on cooperation, the assumption that the interlocutor can figure out why I'm doing that and behaves accordingly. For example, if I ask you about what's happening in Syria, what do you think of what's happening in Syria? And you think this is a sensitive issue. You respond by saying, look, let's go have coffee at the cafeteria. Or the weather is nice for this time of year, isn't it? Then the questioner would give the message that you don't want to talk about what's happening in Syria. You are doing this for a communicative purpose. You are flouting the maxim of relevance or of relation in order to convey the message that you don't want to talk about what's happening in Syria. Or assuming that, okay, and this kind of thing happens quite often when people come together and they start gossiping about someone. And assuming that that someone or a friend of his or hers appears on the scene all of a sudden. They stop telling on him and changes. One of them changes the subject and the others get the message that, okay, let's stop gossiping about X. Why? Because a friend of his has appeared in the scene. And they get tuned to the new topic. Okay. This, all right, changing the topic here is a flouting of the maxim of relevance, but this is done for a communicative purpose. They don't want X's friend to hear what bad things they say about his or her friend. So the maxim of relation has to do with whether someone is relevant or not. If you are relevant, then you are observing the maxim of conversation straightforwardly. But if you flout it, you are relevant, but you are relevant in your own way. You are conveying the message or delivering the message by way of conversational implicature. So as you can see here, we have two key concepts in this theory: observing a maxim of conversation and flouting a maxim of conversation. And both options are based on the cooperative principle, the CP, the fact that interactants cooperate with each other when they engage in communication. Most people, in fact, stop there when they talk about conversation and pictures. They talk about observing a conversation maxim and flouting a conversation maxim. But Grice, in fact, talked about four options. It's true that these are the two key options in human communication, but he mentioned two other possibilities. When someone infringes a maxim of conversation and when someone violates a maxim of conversation. Infringing a maxim of conversation has to do basically with the maxim of manner. And that's when something is produced, an utterance is produced that has more than one meaning, or that has a conversational implicature, has a double meaning, conversational implicature, but the interlocutor, but the speaker is not aware of that. Have you ever said something and people start laughing, but you don't know why they're laughing? I guess all of us may have experienced that, or probably must have experienced that. That's because what you have said carries two meanings, but you are only aware of one. You are not flouting here. If you are aware of both, then you are flouting the maximum manner. But if you are not aware of the conversational implicature, then you are infringing the maximum manner. The speaker is not aware of the conversational implicature, but the interlocutor can figure it out. There is a very interesting example cited in the literature about a British MP. On a live show, he was defending the rights of immigrants in the UK. And in the heat of his defense, he said, "Look, guys, last week I had two Indians for lunch. The audience burst out laughing, but he didn't know why they were laughing. He was so angry. when they told him that his utterance could carry two meanings, that he slaughtered, and it's not only he invited two Indians to lunch, but also he slaughtered two Indians and ate them at lunch. He didn't like that. But what he said, in fact, carried two meanings. That's why, okay, a laughter was generated on the part of the audience, but he was not aware of the conversation in picture. He just meant one thing, that he invited two Indians to lunch, rather than he slaughtered two Indians and had them for lunch. If we look around, we find lots of examples of infringing the maxim of manner, especially when it comes to interlingual communication, simply because language competence may not be there. If, for example, there is a joke about an Arab coming near a policeman in London, he was driving, and he said, "Can I park here? Sir, can I park here?" And the policeman said, "Oh, sure. This is a free country. You can park anywhere." He ended up getting a ticket, as the joke tells us. Bark versus park. Okay, if someone wants to create trouble for the speaker, he would dwell on that. Bray versus pray. Okay, this is basically a matter of language competence. If we look at international science posted in English, we find lots of examples of infringing the maxim of manner. I'll give you just a couple of examples. One, all right, at a zoo in Europe, a sign was put up that reads, "If you have food for the animals, give it to the guard." And people going to the zoo would laugh when they read that sign. Why? Because the sign infringes the maxim of manner, simply because it has a double meaning. It could mean either leave the food with the guard or feed it to the guard. Another example involves a sign at the reception desk at a hotel, reading, "If you have values, leave them at this desk." I wonder, all right, it's very nice to be able to leave values at the desk so one could function freely in his room. But, all right, you know that what's meant is not values, but rather valuables. So again, this is a case of infringing the maxim of manner. The writer of that sign was not aware of that. I can't imagine that he or she was aware of that. He didn't mean it, but that's the way it came out anyway. The fourth option Grice mentioned is violating a maxim of conversation. And here we are specifically talking about the maxim of quantity. When some information is held without being untruthful. So here we cannot assume that cooperation is fully adhered to. There is an element of delusion, or there is an element of deception. This involves cases where the conversational implicature is truthful. Okay, let me say it right. Okay, cases where the utterance is truthful. In other words, the speaker is truthful, but the conversational implicature of the utterance is not valid. And this may happen sometimes. All right, there are many examples in the literature. I'll cite only one of them, then I'll give you my own examples. One example refers to a man sitting on a bench at the park with a dog lying beside him. Another man came by and sat on the same bench. The other man wanted to break the ice and start conversation. So he asked the man sitting there, "Does your dog bite?" And the man responded, "No, it doesn't." The next minute, that dog bit the man. He turned to him and said, "You told me that your dog does not bite." "Oh, yeah, my dog doesn't bite. That's not my dog. My dog is at home. And it's a nice one. It doesn't bite." Okay. This involves not that, no, it doesn't. His answer, no, it doesn't, conversationally implicates that that dog is his and it does not bite. But the conversational implicature is not borne out here. Why? Because he was referring to his dog at home rather than the dog lying beside him. Another example I often give in my classes, one relating to college life, where the buses are, for example. You are a fresher, you go to where the buses are, you want to go to some place, let's say you want to go to Sweden. And you come near a man standing in the door of one of the buses. And you ask him, "Which bus go to Sweden?" And he responds by saying, "It's the C bus." Then you walk away looking for the C bus. But later on you discover that that man was standing in the door of a C bus. Notice that what he said was truthful. It's the C bus. It's truthful. But the conversational implicatures it gives rise to is not valid. This conversation, all right, his utterance conversationally implicates that that bus is not a C bus. But it turned out that it was. So this involves violating the maxim of quantity. This means that the man did not give the whole story. He was supposed to say, "It's the C bus, this bus." But he did not say that. He just said, "It's the C bus," which means that, or which conversationally implicates that it was not a C bus. Okay, so violating the maxim of quantity involves not giving the whole story, withholding some information, which results in deluding the interlocutor. I think that's enough insofar as these four possibilities in this theory: observing a maxim of conversation, flouting a maxim of conversation, infringing a maxim of conversation, and violating a maxim of conversation. The differences between them are supposed to be clear, and I think I have made them clear, made the differences between them clearly, but let me repeat the differences very briefly. Observing a maxim of conversation simply involves, okay, it involves committing yourself to the truth of what you're saying in terms of linguistic truth, using the right amount of language in terms of quantity, in terms of manner. You don't flout any of the maxims. You are perspicuous or clear. You are brief. You are not ambiguous. You are orderly. Infringing a maxim of conversation and both in flouting a maxim of conversation, both. All right, it's based in full cooperation, and the speaker or the speaker and the interlocutor are aware of what's going on in terms of conversational implication. In infringing a maxim of conversation, it's only the interlocutor who's aware of what's going on in terms of conversational implication, but not the speaker. In violating a maxim of conversation, there is an element of deception. Despite the fact that the utterance or the speaker's utterance is truthful, but the conversational implicatures gives rise to is not valid. That's why there is an element of delusion or an element of deception. Before ending this lecture, let me say that according to many theorists, the maxim of relevance is more important than the three other maxims. In fact, there is a theory by the name Relevance Theory, which reduces the four maxims of conversation to one main principle, that is the principle of relevance. And this is done by Sapir and Wilson in the early 80s. It's true that they fell back on Grice's theory, but instead of talking about four maxims of conversation, they only talk about one principle. That is the principle of relevance. So according to relevance theory, there is only one principle, and this principle is a matter of degree. All right, so relevance is a matter of degree. This simply means that instead of talking about flouting the maxim of quality, for example, what we're supposed to invoke here is just the principle of relevance. So when you say that John is a genius, when everyone knows that John is an idiot, you are being relevant. You are relevant. Why? Because the others, based on the contextual factors, based on context, the others figure out the message that you mean that John is an idiot. So relevance here, or what you say, is interpreted in terms of optimal relevance. Optimal relevance means you rule out options. For example, the literal option is ruled out immediately. Why? Because everyone there knows that John is an idiot. And that's why the option is for the second interpretation, that John is an idiot, rather than John is a genius. Optimal relevance is a key concept in this theory. This theory has to do with interpreting utterances in terms of relevance, and relevance is a matter of degree. The amount of information suppressed in our utterances when we engage in communication varies from one utterance to another. Sometimes the suppressed information is so small and can be figured quite readily. And this, in fact, this reflects the fact that human communication is indeterminate or underspecified. There is always something suppressed. One can even cite the use of referring expressions. John came in asking for you this morning. John, it would be crazy for me to use a referring expression like John if you have no idea who John is. So there is something suppressed. I don't say, John, whom I know that you know, came and asking for you this morning. Okay, do I say this? I don't do this, but this is lingering in the background. Okay, so our communication, generally speaking, is underspecified. Human communication is underspecified. That's why there is always something conveyed indirectly. And the fact that we cope with this indirectness is based on our ability to interpret things in terms of optimal relevance. Notice that the more suppressed information there is, the more processing is required. So there is an inverse kind of relationship between the amount of, or the degree of processing and the amount of indirect material or suppressed material. So one can assume that, okay, cloud things, for example, if we look at this in terms of relevance, are less relevant than observations. But they are less relevant insofar as the degree of relevance is concerned, not insofar as whether something is relevant or not, because according to this reductionistic approach, whatever we produce in the course of communication is relevant. The higher the degree of relevance, the less time we spend in processing the utterance. And the lower the degree of relevance, the more time exerted to process an utterance. Here, relevance is a matter of degree. If the degree of relevance is too low, which may happen sometimes, if you say something that what you have said is over the head of your interlocutor, the addressee does not get the message, whether for some reason or another, all right? So it could be because, all right, you are conveying a message indirectly. It could be because you are using terminology that is not familiar to him, whatever the case is. So the degree of relevance is too low. When the degree of relevance is too low, according to relevance theory, an explicature is called for. The interlocutor would inquire about what the speaker means by the utterance, saying, what do you mean by that? Could you repeat what you have said? I can't get it. You're talking over my head. Okay. Sometimes, could you explain what you have said? This is too difficult to interpret for me. Could you explain it? Okay, this is quite possible, all right, when there is a breakdown in communication. This means the interlocutor is not getting the message. And according to this theory, an explicature is called for. The interlocutor would ask for an explanation, and that's what's called explicature in this theory. So this theory, as you can see, is reductionistic in nature. It's reductionistic because it reduces all the maxims of conversation to one main principle, the principle of relevance. So it's more psychologically based. Which one is better? I personally, prefer Grice's theory simply because it is more detailed. and it hits specific insights in human conversation. But relevance theory is also interesting, but it's reductionistic, all right? One would just assume that whatever is said is relevant, and it has to do with whether the interlocutor can process an utterance or not, because whatever one says in conversation is supposed to be relevant. The relevance of, or the degree of relevance varies from one utterance to another. And we cope with this when something unpredictable happens, there is a breakdown in communication, then an explicature is invoked. Okay, thank you very much. I hope that you flout these maxims of conversation, because this would make your communication more interesting. Indirectness is an important feature of human communication. We are often, or many times, indirect in order to avoid many unpleasant things. And thanks for Grice and Sepulcher and Wilson, who have given us very interesting insights on the nature of human communication. Thank you very much, and goodbye.